welcome to Lean in Olympia. We are Interfaith Works, and we are here on the second and fourth Tuesdays of every month around lunchtime at the noon hour to talk about conversations at the crossroads of humanity, justice, and belief. My name is Meg Martin. I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Works, and we are super happy to be here with you today. If you want to check out past episodes of Lean in Olympia, we've covered a lot of really amazing topics, had awesome guests on, and you can do that at our website, interfaith-works.org /Lean in Olympia. Also, we have episodes up on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, so you can check us out all over the internet. I want to thank everybody who came to our virtual Peace Day event last week. We were all super inspired and educated and given the gift of hearing from presenters and performers who do amazing work in our community just about their own processes of healing and justice and how important and vital it is to talk about. We can't talk about peace without talking about justice and what resiliency means, and we're going to continue part of that conversation today on our episode here. I'm super happy to welcome our esteemed guest, Sfirah Madrone, a licensed mental health counselor, community organizer, friend of mine. I'm so grateful for you to be here today. Longtime lean-in role model to going headfirst into hard conversations, and we're just super happy to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into the conversation today, what we're going to talk about is what it really means to take care. That's something I find myself saying to people all the time, like asking folks, how are you doing? How are you taking care of yourself? And thinking about just how difficult that is to do right now, and I think how many people are even just asking themselves, like, what does it mean? And things that maybe once filled up our gas tanks emotionally, physically, whatever, are maybe not doing the job right now because of so many difficult things. And so we're going to lean into that conversation a bit, give some tips and tricks, have some just real talk around what it means to struggle and to build resiliency. But before we really go further into that, I would love to just hear a little bit from you about what the audience should know about you and why you're here today and what you do in the world.
Okay. Well, I'm a mental health counselor. I work for a local tribe, and I also work as a volunteer therapist for a group that is doing supported employment for folks coming off the street and out of jail in Grace Harbor County called Chaplains in the Harbor. So that's kind of like what I do. I've been in Olympia for almost 20 years, and I've done all kinds of things. Lots of social work type things, advocacy, birth work, and just kind of with an emphasis on, people who don't always necessarily have access to good care. So, yeah, that's kind of my career, and I'm a mom to two 16-year-olds, and
Who are awesome.
they are awesome, yeah.
Changing the world every day, amazing people.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I was thinking that a good way to frame this conversation is just to kind of talk a little bit about where we're at in the world right now and how, because I think so much of what can be a challenge is how our own personal experiences are rolling out in the context of these huge issues in our society that we have, in some cases, very little control over. So you're going to see an image on your screen here in a second. The first image is from this really good handout that was distributed by the Department of Health, the Washington State Department of Health. And it's a chart basically of the kind of the pathway of a natural disaster or a crisis or a critical incident. And this is based on lots of research of different critical incidences that have occurred. And it's really important, I think, right now to talk about how we are in the midst of multiple nationwide, in some cases global, critical incidents. So not only the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the global uprising for racial justice, and then just how our own personal experiences play into that. So this chart just is about, so to follow sort of the pathway of the different phases of a critical incident, this is like over the course of about 1 year. So, and then on the axis to the left is sort of the emotional response that we see from low to high with the critical incidences. And so some of these phases might make sense or might line up to people based on the timeline of how things have unfolded. But we are heading up to about the 6 to 9 month mark of the COVID-19 pandemic, which means that we are headed toward the phase of disillusionment. And the phase of disillusionment is defined through this work as fatigue. It's marked by fatigue and a realization that recovery is likely to take time. It's during this phase that behavioral health issues begin to emerge and peak. And commonly during this phase, the incidence of depression, rates of suicide rise, and increasing rates of substance use, like alcohol and drug use. I guess, do you feel like that's where we're at right now, kind of as a society? Does that resonate at all?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that, and you know, as someone who talks to a lot of people about what they're thinking and feeling all day long, I hear a lot of that in kind of what I'm hearing from people. You know, everybody's kind of at a different place with all these things, and you know, this isn't an exact, like, here's the map of a crisis, but it is important to kind of look at this model and have that help you kind of normalize that a lot of people are feeling this way. They might not be talking about it. They're for many different reasons, but you're not alone in feeling that way. And to know that, you know, a lot of probably what you're experiencing is normal and a pretty normal response to something so difficult. Part of, I think part of what can be really difficult is so many people are at a different place, whether it's a different place in the cycle or having a different orientation to looking at some of these social problems, or looking at, you know, a different orientation to justice or to healing or to, you know, being kind of like that dissonance maybe between you and your loved ones, of having a different kind of take on what's going on, or a different even kind of sense of what is happening. And so I think a lot of when we look at this kind of like disillusionment period, and you'll notice that, I mean, it's the emotional lows are way lower than, you know, when the actual onset of the problem is happening. And that really does, you know, that to me, you know, when I work with trauma a lot as a therapist, and oftentimes the most difficult part of the trauma comes later, right? It's not when the trauma is happening, it's kind of the meaning that we make of it later. So,
totally.
So I see that in this, you know, this image and this concept.
Right, like we have this sense of like that the scariest part is the thing that happens. But really, I like how you put that, like the meaning that we make of it, like down the road, is really where some of the biggest challenges we might face emotionally are. And I feel like too, that's the cumulative nature of the stress is what plays out months, years down the road, and how that like impacts our bodies physically as well.
Yeah, and just, I mean, we all kind of have our own relationship to stress, and what does it mean when I'm scared? What does it mean if I don't know what's going to happen? One person might have, it's just the way it is. It's fine. One person that might be deeply troubling to be scared and make it not as possible to kind of talk about it or be connecting with people about that.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Well, I think that leads to this other chart that we wanted to show that's from that same Department of Health report. And it is just a list of basically normal responses, quote unquote normal responses to acute stress. And there's 4 sort of categories, I guess, of how those responses, emotional responses, can play out. And of course, this is not an exhaustive list. Similarly to the chart, this doesn't mean that every single person is going to be, meeting any or all of these symptoms, I guess. But it just kind of provides a bit of like a container or context for us to, human brains love to categorize things and put things in boxes. And so this can just kind of help be a starting place for that. But I know that for myself, I really tend to ignore the physical attributes of stress and how it impacts my body. And I think part of that is because I myself am a trauma survivor, and so I tend to struggle to like stay grounded in my body. But that's something that I've really, really noticed. Just like even shortness of breath, and then of course you're like, do I have COVID? But just like increased pain in my neck and in my back and nerve stuff, and there's just like really a noticeable physical response. But yeah, do you feel like does this list help to sort of explain?
Yeah, and what I kind of say about some of this stuff a lot is that those physical symptoms, that's information from your body of how you might be feeling, right? So many of us, for many reasons, like whether it's surviving trauma or whether it's just capitalism tells us to do this, but we kind of detach from our bodies and from our kind of our body sensations and our feelings. It's hard to really name our feelings a lot of times, or it may be more opportune to not be totally in our feelings, right? And so we get really good at kind of ignoring this information, and so our body has to send us really loud signals, that, and so like for me, there's like a specific headache that I'm like, oh, I am doing too much, that's, or there's like a way that I'm like holding my fist that's like, I am mad and I didn't even clock that I'm mad, So I think this list, you may have your own specific signals that are unique to you that are like, but thinking about it more as this is information of a way that I'm feeling that I might be kind of disconnected from. And once I kind of know what that is, I have a little bit more control over what I can do with it.
And I feel like a subtext a little bit of what you're saying there is like to not attach judgment to what we're experiencing. Like it's not what we're feeling either physically or emotionally isn't like good or bad necessarily. It's just information. And that paying attention to the information that we're receiving is like an action step that we can take in our own healing.
Yeah, kind of like being able to, and that's something that is a cumulative also, right? It's like the more you can, the more you're listening, the more your brain doesn't have to, slam you over the head with it, and the better you get at listening, and the less it has to come out sideways, the more it can kind of come out in a kind of direct channel and straight to you to be able to do something with that information. And then I think that's why also, we need people in our lives that can help kind of help us know that information, know those things about ourselves, and pick up on, it's like, I've noticed that there's been a change in your activity level, some of these kind of behavior things. I've noticed that you're really jumpy lately. Is that information that we need to kind of do something with?
Mm-hmm.
So it's an internal process, and then that's also that's why we've evolved to be together, and in groups, so that we can kind of give each other that information.
That's really cool. I love thinking about that, because it can just be so hard to, well, for me at least, I feel like it can be so hard to be honest with myself. Like, I might notice it,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm just like, but I minimize, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
no, it's fine, I can just push through a little more. No, it's fine, I can push through. Mm-hmm. And I think I really just realized that because one of our managers, Bryant, he talks a lot about the compounding is compounding right now, and how there's just so many concurring elements that
Mm-hmm.
are in everyone's life, and I think I can intellectually really understand that. I'm like, oh yeah, I see all these different big things, and being somebody who's been embedded in public health for so long, you get used to sort of understanding issues on this kind of global level, and
Mm-hmm.
how it can impact so many people. But where I really got taken down was with a recent personal tragedy, and then I was like, oh yeah, I've been ignoring all these signs,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's this personal tragedy occurs on top of all these other things, and then you're just fully laid out,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how many people are dealing with personal tragedies in the context of all of these really huge things that we're dealing with, and that, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
just that noticing is part of the work, and validating your own experience within that is part of healing.
Yeah. Can I ask you to do a little where as you kind of are talking about that, what do you feel? What do you notice in your own body as you talk about that?
I think that I noticed my heart rate go up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, almost an excited feeling or something.
Mm-hmm. So you're gonna know kind of what that means for you, and what to do with it, more than anybody else, more than any therapist, or more than but just taking that second sometimes to be okay, I just went there with the thing. What happened? And the more we kind of get in that rhythm of doing that and presencing, in that, what is actually happening right now. The trauma isn't happening right now. I'm actually here right now, or the tragedy or whatever it is that in this room today, it's not happening.
Mm-hmm.
But I do still have a physiological response to it, right? And that's happening for us all the time, whether we pay attention to it or not. And we get, another thing that I end up saying in therapy a lot is that there's this difference between desensitization and numbing, right? So there's avoidance and I just can't right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's okay, I'm having this experience. There's very little that I can change about that, but I know that I'm having it, and I'm here in it, right? So kind of the distinction between those things, and that's the difference between okay, got to keep going, and wait, what just happened?
Mm-hmm.
Is that?
No, totally. I wouldn't have even kind of had the thought that my heart rate had gone up had you not stopped me to ask about that point. We have a really busy office, and so we just got distracted by a phone call for a second. Thank you, Cabin Light, for figuring it out. You all are amazing. Will you just go back a little bit and just talk a little bit more about the difference between desensitization and numbing? Because I think that is really an important thing for people to understand, particularly when it comes to increased risk of substance use and overdose and those kind of things.
Yeah, and so, I mean, okay, so where to start with that? So, will you ask me that question again?
Yeah, totally.
You asked it just right, but I can't quite catch it.
Yeah, so just trying to like suss out a little bit more the difference between desensitization and numbing. And like why, maybe, I guess kind of to go on further with that, it's like what would be potential benefits or potential risks, I guess, to kind of both of those reactions, and how are they different? Yeah.
So, thinking about it from like a harm reduction perspective, it's like we don't have to do one or the other. Like there's appropriate, just like there's appropriate rules for numbing in anesthesia, right? Like we have to like numb a part of the body to be able to do something really intense to it, right? And then that's not the right tool for every job, and so I would say that desensitizing would be more like, okay, I'm gonna bring my awareness to the fact that this is happening right now. I'm having a response to it, whether that's and it doesn't have to be reasonable. It's just what it is. Like, it doesn't have to be reasonable that your heart is racing. It just is, and so like just bringing your awareness to that, and that kind of gives your brain the message like, I can have this response, and it isn't actually an emergency. Like I can have this response even when in this room, in this place, I actually am safe. And you may give yourself some of that messaging, right? Like, rather than the messaging of like, there's nothing to be afraid of. This is dumb. Like, why should I feel this way? Like, it's so much worse for other people. Like, it's, whatever the kind of messaging that comes up, kind of giving yourself that like, okay, it's just what it is. Like it is, I am feeling that way. I'm feeling that way, and yet I am okay, and I am going to be okay. Then your brain, next time that it feels that way, it might be a little bit less like, okay, wait, am I okay or am I not okay? And you can kind of like, and that's cumulative, right? Like that process of like, I can gradually learn that I can be feeling a feeling, or whatever it is, and be okay. And I can use that as my information of like, what do I want to do next? What part of this do I want to consent to? What part of it do I need to give, have a boundary around? What part of it do I need to, what do I need to change here? What do I have control over? What do I not have control over? Like bringing your thinking brain kind of back, because, like we use the back part of our brain to survive, to like run away or fight or, disappear and not attract attention to ourselves. And we have access to our thinking brain when we're kind of more regulated. And so just that moment of like, okay, what is actually happening here? Getting yourself back grounded into it will give you access to that thinking brain where you can make decisions and be able to, make decisions about what to do next.
Okay, I'm having 1,000 thoughts about this. This is awesome. I think one really important piece of what you're saying is like, okay, or something I think a lot of people experience is this fear that if I take the time to sit and think about really where I'm at and how I'm doing, that I'm going to somehow take up too much space or take away from other people's experiences. And I think that I hear a lot of that, particularly with white people right now, of just this like, I want to shrink because I don't want to take up so much space in the world. But then by not taking the moment to do that internal work for yourself, you end up taking more space by like trying to be like, no, other people have it worse, or no, this or that, or it's like it twists into this thing where I think that the fear is realized or something about taking up more space than you want to, and that if it's almost like the kind of the thing with like panic attacks, right? Where if like the longer that you fight it and try to like not allow it to keep happening, it gets worse and worse and worse. And so if you are able to get to a place where you can just breathe through that pain, or childbirth or whatever, you know, it's like the acceptance of it actually helps us move through it faster, I guess, is the point.
Yeah, because that kind of reinforcement of like, this is the worst thing that could happen, like, you know, like I am not in control of my body or my thinking or whatever, and then that just kind of like reinforces itself, whereas, and that to me, like I feel like there's a lot of parallels to that in that verse, you know, that kind of, where it's like, many of us lost control over things that we did have control over with COVID, and you know, some of us became aware of things that we thought we had control over that we actually didn't, and like that's kind of in the field right now, and so kind of the more we like try to grab onto control of things that we don't actually have control over, you know, just kind of like the more difficult it becomes, and the more kind of panicked we become about the control that we don't have. And you know, similar with panic attack, right? So, and then similar with I think as a white person, I've never really been taught to see myself as white, and that is, you know, just seen as like the normal, like the normal thing, and so then I never really learned like what is the somatic or the kind of embodied sense of whiteness, and so then that comes up, you know, but I don't know how to recognize that, and it's very similar to like what we were just talking about, right? Where it's like, I wouldn't even know if my embodied whiteness, and there's a really great book about this kind of somatic abolition is what they call it, and it's called My Grandmother's Hands, and it really kind of helps people in any kind of body, but to kind of understand the somatic experience of race and racialized energy, racialized experience, and I've learned a lot from it as a white person. But so that's a resource for that. And then there was something from what you said that I wanted to get to, but I can't remember what it is now.
There's just too much good stuff.
Yeah, I feel like we could just like talk about this stuff all day long.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think just to like reiterate the importance of like working to not attach judgments to the feelings that do come up. I feel like I just can't like repeat that to myself enough because it's like so so immediate, which is the other thing I really want to emphasize about what you were talking about the back of the brain and the front of the brain, is that it's when we get into that trauma response, it's an automatic response, like an automatic chemical response, meaning that we don't actually have access, you said it, but we don't actually have access to the frontal part of our brain that is where all of our logic and reasoning live. And I think that, like, I try to talk with community members sometimes when they might be, like, witnessing someone's behavior on the street, right? That makes people who have all their basic needs met on a daily basis, who are, you know, have access to privacy and the ability to do some of the things that we as humans do that might be less socially acceptable within the confines of our own home. It's like, oh, this is just wild behavior that is so out of the ordinary. But when you understand trauma, you know that that response that that person might be having on the street is completely in line with their experiences that they're having every day of intense trauma, and that it is this automatic response. And I think that we as a society have this way of trying to like force this idea that somehow the responses that we have to hard things that happen are our choice,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, or our responsibility.
Or our responsibility, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like there's this thing about the level of control you have over your feelings, and then how do you access the ability to think?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that's the chasm, I feel like, because we do have more control over the thoughts that we have,
Mm-hmm.
which can then help regulate our emotions. But if we can't even get to that
Mm-hmm.
access of our brain, then it's like a losing battle or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, and I think too sometimes sometimes like when we're dealing like with really big stuff and really complex emotions and stuff, I try to have at least a little bit of like simplification. Like, how can we make this the most simple shape it can be?
Mm.
And we talk about that kind of triangle between thinking, feeling, and behavior, right? And we do have the most control over our thoughts of any of those things, but our feelings give us the most information, and sometimes sometimes our thinking gives us information, but using the feeling as an access point to like, what are the thoughts that are going through my head? Is that accurate? Is that, and then maybe doing something in terms of behavior or, those physical needs. Like, is there something I can do to get myself to the place where I can really tune into what this feeling is, so that I can figure out what I'm thinking and how I want to be thinking about it, and not silver lining it, but like, is there something that can shift here? Maybe there isn't, but maybe there is, and so I'd rather kind of, and then it goes back to that, to the needs, right? So like, and when you have really limited options about what behaviors you can do, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you can go and have some privacy or get your, take a nap or have a snack or whatever, like, that's great. And then we talk a lot about kind of people need to take responsibility for themselves, but like, we also need to take responsibility as a culture for the fact that we're limiting the choices of what behaviors people can have in order to kind of get on this triangle loop,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That's such a helpful way of looking at it, I feel like, where it's like, is there something I can do? It, like, I think for people who are linear thinkers,
Mm-hmm.
that, like, brings this hope that there's, if, like, one action, or if one spot isn't accessible, there's, like, another option
Mm-hmm.
of potentially how to get to where you're trying to go.
Mm-hmm.
Either emotionally, behaviorally, or cognitively.
Yeah, and I mean, people who are not having their needs met and kind of like not having access to the behaviors are relying on their thinking. I mean, like, people thinking their way through like being very hungry or being not having a need met. That's happening all the time, right? So it's not like they may have more access to their thinking than their, the ability to kind of change the situation. But we kind of we can't expect our physiology to function any differently than it does. It's been functioning that way for a really long time.
Yeah.
And it's good to have a fight or flight. It's like, it's good that we have that, brain that gets us out of there when we're in danger. Like, that's good. That's why we've survived as a species,
Yeah.
It's just not the tool for every job. And we when we get triggered, it's the only tool we have.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think something that one of our panelists, Malika Lomont, said at the Peace Day event that has just really stuck with me was that in the same way that trauma is cumulative, like the trauma that we experience and that our ancestors before us have experienced, right?
Mm-hmm.
That there's this like cumulative nature that does change
Mm-hmm.
DNA
Mm-hmm.
over time. There's lots and lots of information and research to like show that this is true. But in the same way that happens for trauma and hardship, it happens for healing and resilience.
Yeah.
And so I want to just like talk a little bit about, because there's this, I think, desire, particularly when things get really, really, really hard, where it's like, I just need this big shift.
Mm-hmm.
I just need this like huge change, and then I'll feel better, and then it'll be easier, and then these kind of things. And I feel grateful, like going through recovery processes throughout my life, that I've had a lot of lessons of like the small things really do add up. And so I guess I just want to take, like, is there anything that you'd want to add to that in terms of the like cumulative nature of resiliency? And also, do you have some small tips or tools or things that we could talk about that might be useful for the audience?
Yeah, that, what you just said, and what Malika said, it makes me, I was working at a job that was very acute, right? Like there's like lots of really difficult mental health crises, and just kind of, you know, I was dealing with some like really acute trauma that people were dealing with, and knowing kind of like that there is that kind of a cumulative toll, and also with vicarious trauma, like the trauma that you witness, and even just like the larger scale of, you know, like living in a society that is not taking responsibility for its collective needs, and then realizing that I'm like, oh, I actually have access to more resilience than the average person because of being in this role, right? Because I'm like so exposed to trauma, I'm also so exposed to resilience, and like and being able to kind of presence in that also, right? So it's not, again, that's not like a silver lining thing, right? It's not, I would never want somebody to go through that so that I could feel better about humanity, right?
Yeah, totally.
But being able to be like, these two things are true at the same time, right? Like, this is devastating, and also like, people don't know how incredible people are, and like how much they walk through and make it out the other side of, because, you know, that's not necessarily the first thing that we talk about, right? So presencing with those moments of resilience, I think, is important. And also, I mean, part of that is like understanding your own story, and like presencing with the moments of resilience in your own life that have gotten you to this place. And that, some people call that gratitude. I think that's like another way to think about that. And, you know, so while I hate to be the therapist here talking about gratitude lists, like it doesn't have to be a list in a journal, you know, but like having like, you know, it's like I'm like on the beach and I'm like, that is so beautiful, and being able to like feel the awe, feel the like gratitude that I get to like be on this beach right now. Yeah. Find out what that feels like in my nervous system. And I actually like have access to that anytime, that feeling state of awe and gratitude, right? And so that's something that's like anybody can do at any time. Like we could, you know, do it anytime. Yeah. And I 10 out of 10 recommend presencing with gratitude and resilience. And then I guess, I mean, it essentially all comes back to that, right? So, just noticing, I think using your body is a good tool, and how we could do some kind of grounding things to be able to kind of like access that information that are super simple. Do you want to do that?
Yeah, let's do it. Okay. And audience, people who are watching, if you want to join us in this, we could all practice together. Okay. So
I'll go from kind of like having the least control over your thinking to the kind of the most, right? So the first thing, you know, there may be times where you are just very detached from where, like, how you're feeling, dissociated, or just really kind of flooded. And so this would be a good one for that, right? So pick one color, any color that you like.
Do I tell you?
Yeah, we'll use it. And you can all do that out there.
Okay, blue.
Okay, so just look around the room and find everything that's blue, and you can say it out loud.
Okay, face mask box. Lip doily thing. My hair. Pride flag. Blue stripe. Computer cord. lid to the water jug, tea container, the boiler system piping over there. It's part of the printer, Ethernet cord.
Mm-hmm.
Trash bag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of blue things.
Yeah. Lots of blue things in here. So that's kind of like doing a few things for your brain. It's giving you a singular focus, right? So your brain's just focused on all the blue things. A color is very, for most people, color is very easy to find. You could do a texture, something, you could adapt that if you need to, but you're not going to be able, if you're in that place, you're not going to be able to do a ton of thinking. So that's a really good kind of way. So you're having a singular focus. You're also looking around the room. So with that, you're taking in all kinds of other information about your actual safety at that moment, right?
Yeah,
so
totally.
like, you're not like looking for a threat, but you're just also scanning the environment, and your brain is able to kind of organize and give yourself kind of a sense of safety without even trying to. So that's that
I
one.
love that. So you could do that with anything really, where you're just like, find all the trees that are around you, or find, like a color, an object.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it's kind of, you'll find your own ways to do that. Each person will find their own ways to kind of, to presence in the environment. And if you finish that and you want to do another color, you can do another color. You can, like move your head from one side to the other, and then up and down, and like looking all around you, like to kind of anchor it more even in that. But even if you're not aware, if you're feeling flooded or triggered or whatever, and you don't know why, it doesn't matter. You don't have to know why, until you kind of get that sense in your body of that you actually are safe in your environment.
And that also does, another thing that does is immediately impact your nervous system response. So this isn't exact science, of course, but I think about the nervous system similarly with like the automatic response part and the thinking part of the brain, is that there's almost these like tracks, and there's like the automatic track, which leads to all your survival responses, which makes it really difficult to get into your thinking or your reason track. And so these little things physiologically are able to help you jump tracks.
Yeah, exactly.
In those moments.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it.
Okay.
Yeah, so then, let's say you did that, you're like, okay, I got a little bit of a grasp on it. You could start with this of just engaging your senses, right? So, we have a lot of senses, but most of us know of at least 5, and so like, sight, sound, hearing, tasting, smelling, right? So, seeing we already did a little bit of that, right? So, name 5 things that you can see right now.
Sfirah, chair, your boot, camera, rug.
Okay. What's 4 things you can hear?
Clock ticking. There's like a buzz, I think of the light maybe. Cars outside. My own voice.
Okay. Let's see, so sight, hearing, touch. Okay, so 3 things that you can feel, like either internally or like that you can use your sense of touch for.
Okay, the fabric, paper, and this pillow that's a very different type of fabric.
Okay. 2 things that you can either taste right now or that you can really, you can remember tasting.
My coffee from this morning, it was very good. And the water here at United Churches, I always can know that I'm drinking that water.
And what's one thing you can smell?
I guess I can smell the laundry, the lavender laundry detergent.
Mm-hmm. So those five senses are really good sources for external information, right? And so sometimes when you're really flooded or really triggered or just really in distress, like you're only using internal information. And we did use a little bit of internal information, right? Like your memory of taste. But it helps you kind of orient to like, okay, I can absorb information from outside myself. So that can be a helpful one. And then the last one that I want to share is kind of just something that I do at the end of sessions a lot of times. If I'm doing kind of trauma therapy work with people, it's really important to like come back to this room in this moment, right? And to also just it can feel like you're going to float away, right? And so this is something that people can do no matter where they're at. You can do this in the middle of a meeting if you need to, but so can you feel your feet? Can you feel where they're touching your sock or shoe?
Yes.
Can you imagine where your shoe is touching the carpet or floor?
Yes.
Can you feel where the floor is a part of the building? And can you feel that building is sitting on earth because, it's being held to the earth with gravity?
Yes.
And just feel into that for as long as you want. Feel the force that's actually like holding you here to this earth all the way through. And you just kind of pull it up through your head. And if any of that doesn't make sense, it's okay. Just bring it back to the feeling of your feet on the floor.
Yeah.
And so that's just a really quick way to kind of like get back. And then from there you can either be like, that's enough, or you can kind of be like, okay, what happened for me there? Or you can do that later, but
Right.
that's going to let you kind of bring up the information that you need to figure out where to go, what you have control over and what you don't.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. I'm wondering too if you could give just a little bit of information. I mean, so many people have loved ones who are struggling right now. As we know, like data shows that there's a really strong likelihood for increased risk of suicide, of overdose, of relapse for people who might be in long-term recovery. What kind of advice or tools, I guess, could you share with the audience of how to broach those conversations with loved ones during this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we have increased stressors and decreased access to coping strategies, right? And so we might have to come up with new coping strategies, and we don't really want to, and so I think it's safe to assume that people are struggling, and if they were already struggling, or if they're kind of if it's already taking a lot to kind of be okay, then it's safe to assume that that's very challenged. So I think just be, not assuming that people, I see a lot of this messaging of like, don't be afraid to reach out or whatever, and I think that that's true. I think the decreasing the stigma of like reaching out and saying that, I'm having a really hard time is something that can change. But also I think that we can kind of noticing things, like small things that are not high stakes. Like, I've noticed that you have seemed like really tired lately, or you seemed really like, it's been hard to connect with you. And maybe I wouldn't even say it like that, because that's, it's like, I'm finding myself really wanting to connect with you, and I wonder if you might be having a hard time, or I see how much you're having to deal with. I see, and like really as a offer of being seen rather than a, help me feel better about my feelings about how you might be feeling is a really good, so you can think about that beforehand. Like, think about what is it actually that I want to offer to this person, not what would I need to feel reassured.
Yeah, that is so real, and like the difference and practicing it, I feel like you were able to just be like, I'm going, like, it's been difficult to connect with you, and then it's like, well, hold on.
Yeah.
I actually, from the love in my heart that I have for you, really want to connect. I'm like longing to connect with you.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's been, or like, like just being able to like practice how it can be, just like what you just said, how it can be an actual offer of genuine love and support rather than a reassurance to your own worry or concern.
Yeah, and your loved one might not want to go about it the way that you want them to go about it, right? And so how are you going to manage your own feelings about that, right? And they may not know, and it may be someone kind of reflecting back to them, like, I see you, like, I see that this is difficult, or I see, that doesn't mean you have to do anything different, but like, I'm with you. It just sends a message that like, we are together. I'm tracking you, like, not like I'm surveilling you, but like I notice when something's up for you, because I love you, and like, I mean, that's one thing, and I think something I've noticed from being a therapist that I didn't really realize before, just as a person who has loved ones and just a person in community, is that a lot of times when people are struggling with something like relapse or like thinking about suicide or something, it's not a secret to them, like they think are probably thinking about it a lot, right? And so just now I've become very comfortable with asking my clients, like, is that something that you're thinking about, or is like this something that's been on your mind, or but that might be something for us as just community members to get a little bit more comfort, and knowing that there's probably a lot of pre-crisis that you really do have a little bit more maneuverability in than when it doesn't have to be an emergency before you kind of say, I'm here for you, and like, let's figure, if I'm not the right person for you to talk to about this, let's figure out who is, because you deserve that.
In some like harm reduction recovery kind of community stuff, that reminds me of like this idea of raising the bottom, like rather than having people hit rock bottom, people die when they hit rock bottom. And so it's like, how do we raise the bottom? And I think that sort of like, what are the opportunities in that pre-crisis to really connect to somebody? Because just like what you said, there's just so much more maneuverability and options, and and I think like not being afraid to lean in, I had to those discussions, is and we're not really taught to do that necessarily. Like we're taught to react often rather than to sort of see things ahead of time, and I don't know.
And to respect people's privacy, or like whatever, certainly there's like there's like personal boundaries, and like your relationship with it depends on you, kind of like your relationship with a person, but like if you feel like, if you're like picking up on that somebody needs just to be seen or to just be checked in on, like I say go with it, because what's the worst that can happen if you accidentally check in with someone that didn't want to be checked in with?
Yeah, totally. That's so real. Like they'll just be like, leave me alone or something, and it's really worth that risk.
I think so.
Is there anything else? I guess the only kind of thing that's still lingering for me that I feel like is really helpful is trying to figure out ways to connect to core values that you have, and being aware of what your core values are, and then being able to make decisions throughout your day or throughout your week that actively connect you to your core values, because that ultimately is going to be what, you know, drives a lot of us. And I think at least a lot of our audience and the folks who have been involved with Interfaith Works in different ways over the decades. And that might look like spiritual connection, that might look like cultural connection. But yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add to kind of that idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's I'm really glad that you brought that up. I think probably our values are where we connect with people that we also disagree with. Right? Like we might have like disagreements about how to live that value, but like the value itself we do actually share with a lot of people. And so having that be kind of what connects us. You know, I know that there's like a lot of people I disagree with politically who like also really want dignity for, you know, like liberation for humankind and like and so like being able to connect with them on that level makes me feel less alone. I think it makes them feel less alone, and like it definitely makes me feel like I'm not in an antagonistic relationship with the world, you know, to be connecting. And we've always wanted shared vision, you know, like that's what drives us to faith. That's what drives us to like, you know, activism or liberation work or whatever, you know, because there are some things that we want because it's good for all of us, you know, and so I don't even you know, I'm like, okay, like even talking about that, I'm like, oh, I feel more relaxed, like even thinking about that.
Totally.
That's who's out there, you know, like, yeah. So I think as a mental health intervention, that's good. I think as a like getting a moment in history thing, like, and
yeah, totally. Well, and I think also, you know, figuring out what kind of resources do exist in the community, and we didn't prepare like a full list of that for this, but know that you can always just email Interfaith Works if you have questions about how to access mental health services. You had said when we were prepping for this just that you wanted people to know that therapy can be whatever you need it to be. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
And like acknowledging that there's a huge access issue to like mental health services, but for you know, if it is available, it can be, you know, I sometimes see my therapist every single week, and I sometimes see my therapist, you know, like it's like 9 months in between, you know, and it's just kind of, you know, sometimes I have a really focused like goal, and sometimes I'm like, I just need to like debrief all this stuff, you know. So I think sometimes we think of therapy as there's like lots of different ways that we think of therapy, and I just want to say that that's something that that you can be in the driver's seat of to get what you need, and sometimes that's, you know, my loved one is going through something and it's hard for me to deal with that, and I need a place to deal with my feelings about it so I can show up for them better, or everything that's going on is really overwhelming, and I need, you know, or I have these symptoms that are really making my life more difficult or whatever. So yeah, I always try to kind of make that pitch of therapy because I'm real into it.
Totally. And there are ways to access therapy for people who are underinsured or uninsured through the Mental Health Access Program with the Olympia Free Clinic, also through Partners in Prevention Education Services or PIPE. So like I said, you know, please do, audience, reach out if that's something that we can help with, and we might be able to list some of those resources on the notes for this episode, also on our website. Is there anything that we left out?
I don't think
Anything else you want to add?
I don't think so. I like could do this all day. This is great.
I know.
I was very nervous.
Yeah.
It's my first time, so, but it's really nice to talk to you about all this and to talk to all of you about this.
Yeah. I do. I'm feeling drawn right now to just really say, like, that this episode, I really want it to be dedicated to everybody in our community, myself included, my family included, who have lost loved ones during this time, to these issues that we're talking about today, to overdose and to suicide and to the continued violence that occurs in communities and families' lives because of the society that we live in. And that grief is so compounding with the global realities that we're all part of right now. And so obviously there's so many tools and things that we don't have time to discuss today or didn't get to. Some of this that we mentioned, you might be like, heck to the no, I'm never doing that. Some of it might have really resonated, but just please know that there are options and there are pathways for how we can take care of ourselves and of each other during this time. So thank you so much, Sfirah, for being here. And thank you all for tuning in. You can always check out our past episodes on YouTube or on our website, interfaith-works.org. Please like, subscribe, comment to join in the conversation. If there's questions, we'll try to always answer them afterwards. And next time, our next episode is going to be October 13th with Corey Passons, our Interfaith Relations Program Manager, who will have guests from local amazing organization Cielo, who we love. They promote community, self-sufficiency, and leadership to Latinos in the South Puget Sound area. The conversation will explore their mission statement and the work that they do, as well as perspectives on death and remembrance and ancestry as we prepare for our annual All Souls Day event, which is an event that we do that honors the lives of people whose remains have gone unclaimed. And so we do this partnership with the Thurston County Coroner's Office, and also recognize community members who have died by suicide in the last year as well. So if you want to help Interfaith Works, what we do, learn more about us, please visit our website, learn more about what our ongoing needs are, including volunteerism and donations. And coming into winter, we are especially needing warm clothes, meals for our shelters, bikes, tents, sleeping bags, survival gear, so that we can get that out to folks who are unsheltered in our area. Sfirah, you're amazing.
You're amazing.
What a pleasure. Thank you all. Thank you to Cabin Light Studios, and we will see you next time.